the 14th century. The Crusades were finally over. After 12 invasions and 200 years of fighting, the last European Christian soldiers were driven out of the city of Acre in the Holy Land in 1292. It is generally accepted that the West, that is the European Crusaders, the Christians, lost the Crusades. That is only partly true. Militarily, they lost the Crusades. But in a number of other cultural ways, the West gained a myriad number of advantages which we still profit from. Consider mathematics. Before the West made contact with the Arab world, mathematics could not exist in Europe because Western Europeans were still using Roman numbers, which had, of course, no cipher. That is, there's no zero in Roman numbers. So if you're telling somebody how to add and you say add x11 minus x11, you don't have an answer. You just sit there and roll your eyes and dig your toe in the ground. It keeps doing this. I don't know. There's no answer. So, of course, there couldn't be any math. When the Crusaders came back with their contact from the Arabic world, they said, we got better numbers. They have really good numbers. They're called to this day Arabic numbers. And they had a zero. So without a zero, you could not add up a column. You couldn't balance your checkbook. Actually, I can't balance my checkbook with a zero. But nevertheless, you do need the zero. You do need Arabic numbers. Consider that the sciences of mathematics, of physics, of accounting, all of those things could not be done until we switched over to Arabic numbers. The Crusaders, the scholars among the Crusaders, actually came back from the libraries of Byzantium, Constantinople, Alexandria, with hidden writings of the Greek philosophers, Aristotle and Socrates and Plato, which had been buried in the libraries in Constantinople. These provided the basis of modern philosophy. It allowed philosophers such as Thomas Aquinas and St. Anselm and Descartes and Hume and all the other philosophers, that is, those who dealt with thought, to publish things like the Summa Theologica. It gave us the thought process that defines existence and non-existence, being and potential. It gave us the sciences of Thomistic philosophy, metaphysics, scholasticism, logic. Consider tastes. Up to the time of the Crusades, the European peasant had a diet which consisted of what the peasant had planted during the penitential season of Lent. They are called to this day lentils. They are peas, beans, barley, and oats. The average European peasant, say in France, lived his whole life on a diet consisted of lentils and lentil soup, of black bread, and cheese. That was your whole life. So a kid came home from school, he'd say, Ma, what are we going to have for dinner? He knew it was going to be lentil soup again. So the Crusaders came back, and they said, hey, wait a minute, wait till you see what we have. We have delights like cinnamon and lemons and olives and ginger and all the spices. They came back with oranges and pepper and figs and dates and, of course, sugar. They gave us a whole new course in dining, which is the dessert. They spawned a new profession, which was, of course, the profession of being a chef. It starts out in Venice, and then it reaches its glorious culmination in Paris. People came to know that there's more to eating than just lentils and cheese. Medicine changed considerably. When the Crusaders got to the Holy Land, they realized that the Arabs had better doctors than they did. They had better medicine, better understanding of anatomy. The reason for that is because it was a feeling in the Church of Rome at the time that your body is going to be reincarnated with your soul upon the Last Judgment, and naturally you couldn't take things out of that body like the spleen and the heart, so you were not allowed to do dissection. Arabs had no such qualms, and they taught a lot to the West about how the body worked. Also, they came from the Arabic world with the writings of a brilliant doctor, physician by the name of Moses Maimonides. Moses Maimonides was a Jewish physician who was the doctor for the royal court of Egypt. He left us with a legacy of medicine and medical aphorisms. He taught the art of medicine. In fact, it was Moses Maimonides who first said to all the doctors for all the ages henceforward these remarkable words of wisdom. He said, you should never, never accept a personal check. He said that. One other legacy that is little known is the legacies of the Knights of Malta and the Masonic Order. All that remained of the crusading fighting forces after 1292 were two orders of knights. These were the Knights Hospitallers, also called the Knights of St. John, eventually the Knights of Malta, and the Knights Templar. The two orders had a great deal in common. They were both, took quasi-religious vows. That is, when they were on the field or in a campaign, they took the vows of chastity and obedience. They also were both settled by the Pope, and they also were secret societies. They were also very tough fighting forces. There were some differences. The biggest difference is the Knights Templar had a ton of money and the Knights Hospitallers didn't, and that turned out to be a great disadvantage, as we shall see. There were other differences. The Knights Hospitallers originally went to the Holy Land right after the conquest of Jerusalem in 1095, sent by the Pope to open a hospital called St. John's Hospital in Jerusalem. When the Knights Hospitallers were driven out of Jerusalem, they went first to the Isle of Cyprus and eventually to the island of Malta. Then they were driven out of there by Turkish sailors 2.5 centuries later, and they eventually wound up in the Vatican. But the Knights Hospitallers then became the Knights of Malta, and they are still a very important part of the Roman Catholic Church. You can become a Knight of Malta if you don't mind spending some money and wearing some fancy robes, but they are an important arm of the Roman Catholic Church, Knights of Malta. Knights Templars are different. Their first order was to guard the temple, which was a Christian temple at that time, up on what we now call the Temple Mount or the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. They also were good fighters. When they were finally driven out of Jerusalem, they went to the Isle of Cyprus. There they had their Grand Master, whose name was Jacques de Molay. Well, from the Isle of Cyprus, most of them left and went back to France. Most of the Knights Templar were French, and they were nobility. So they went back to France, and they bankrolled a lot of the kings and queens of Europe, including the papacy. That is, they loaned money. Now here comes the politics. The king of France in the time we're talking about, 1307, is a man by the name of Philip IV. He's also called Philip the Fair because of his countenance, not because of his justice. He owes the Knights Templars some money. Then he needs more money because he has to get a dowry for his daughter who's going to get married. Well, he thinks, how am I ever going to pay back the terrible amount of money that I owe to the Knights Templar? He said, I got an idea. It's a diabolical idea, even for the 14th century. He said, we will have all the Knights Templar declared heretics. Once they're declared heretics, then we can burn them at the stake